In Yu-Gi-Oh, one of the common ways to win is by diminishing your opponent's life points to 0. The most effective way to do this is with battle damage from monsters. Over the course of Yu-Gi-Oh, there have been a bunch of ways to prevent this from happening, and in this list we'll go over some of the best cards that prevent your opponent from attacking in one way, shape, or form. And starting off our list at number 10 is the legendary Swords of Revealing Light. This older spell has a unique effect in which, once activated, Swords of Revealing Light remains on the field until the end of your opponent's third turn. From when the card is activated to the end of your opponent's third turn, your opponent's monsters can't declare an attack. On top of that, there's also a secondary effect in which, once activated, all face-down monsters your opponent controls are flipped face-up. Now, Swords of Revealing Light is an old card which gained popularity through the anime when it was commonly and famously used by Yugi multiple times to win against countless duelists that he faced off against. Although most people use Swords for its effect to prevent their opponent's monsters from attacking for 3 turns, Yugi tended to use it for its secondary effect to reveal the face-down monsters that were on the field. Swords of Revealing Light was great at preventing attacks and stalling the game for 3 turns. Stalling your opponent out for 3 turns while you either set up some defense or attack with your own monsters was pretty good effect back in the day. However, this was back in the day, and Yu-Gi-Oh has changed a lot. The main drawback is that Swords of Revealing Light needs to stay on the field to keep the effect going, and with the amounts of negates and destruction methods in modern Yu-Gi-Oh like Baron de Fleur or Axis Code Talker that most decks run, Swords of Revealing Light doesn't stand a chance to really stay around very long. Regardless, Swords of Revealing Light is one of the oldest stalling tools that buys you 3 full turns of safety from your opponent's attacks. And at number 9, we have Scrap Iron Scarecrow. This trap card targets the attacking monster and negates the attack. But rather than sending the card to the graveyard after use, Scrap Iron Scarecrow sent itself back face down. When the card came out in 2008 with the Yu-Gi-Oh's 5D starter deck, it found a lot of popularity. It's rare to see trap cards with the ability to reset themselves after they've been used. Coupled with the effect to negate a singular attack, which was pretty good effect for the time, and it has seen usage since it's released. However, once you figure out the magic trick, there isn't much of a spectacle anymore. Once you knew where Scrap Iron Scarecrow was set, it was pretty easy to target your destruction at its location. On top of that, due to the nature of setting the card once it's been used, Scrap Iron Scarecrow can only be used once per turn. And so, if there were more than one monsters attacking you, Scrap Iron Scarecrow would only prevent one and not save you from the others. However, Scarecrow is still a reliable card for preventing your opponent from attacking, and for its time, it was quite the staple seen play in all sorts of decks. Nowadays, Yu-Gi-Oh is a different story. Most decks in modern Yu-Gi-Oh tend to destroy your field before the battle phase can even begin, so you might not even get a chance to activate Scrap Iron Scarecrow before it's destroyed. Regardless, Scrap Iron Scarecrow was a great card for its time for its reusability and consistent attack negation. And at number 8, we have another ancient card, Ordeal of a Traveler. Released back in 2005, this continuous trap was an old school floodgate. The trap card forces your opponent to play a guessing game before they can attack. The effect of this card makes it so your opponent chooses a random card from your hand, and then they must call the card type in order to attack, from monster, spell, or trap. And if they call it correct, the attack goes through. However, if they lose the 1 in 3 guessing game, the attacking monsters return to the hand instead. This old school floodgate has a pretty good effect that not only prevents your opponent from attacking, but also has non-targeting removal, which is one of the best forms of removing a card in the game. Because if a card has protection like Avermax, it's an excellent way to get rid of it. The bounce component is also a good form of removal, so it has a 2-in-1 upside. This card is unironically a good way to outboss monsters in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Though, because modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Meta decks would just destroy the card before entering the battle phase, it's not really a contender as a staple card in any deck. So unless you're running a very specific deck, like maybe Eldritch that focuses on continuous traps and floodgates, Ordeal the Traveler doesn't really have a place in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And on the more offensive side of preventing your opponent's monsters' attacks, at the number 7 spot we have Mirror Force. Mirror Force has the simple effect where if your opponent declares an attack, you can destroy all your opponent's attack position monsters. This effect has had a huge impact on the game ever since it was released in one of the first sets of Yu-Gi-Oh! The card has had such an impact that there have been multiple versions of Mirror Force printed, all with similar effects that target your opponent's monsters in specific battle positions. For example, there's Quaking Mirror Force that changes all of your opponent's attack position monsters to face down defense position, Blazing that destroys and deals burn damage, Storming which bounces all the monsters back to the hand, and Drowning which spins all the monsters. By destroying all attack position monsters, not only does Mirror Force prevent the current monster from attacking, but resets your opponent's momentum as the rest of your opponent's attacking force will also be destroyed. This card has been very popular over the years because it contains one of the strongest forms of removal in the game, non-targeting mass removal. However, like most traps these days, they are slow and typically outfavored by hand traps, which can stop a big board from being set up in the first place. So most traditional trap cards like Mirror Force have been in decline in terms of usage, even if they have really amazing effects like destroying all your opponent's monsters. And at number 6, we have the Electromagnetic Turtle. This 2015 card has seen a surprising amount of usage since its release. The effect of this card allows it to banish it from the graveyard during your opponent's turn in order to just end the battle phase. Being a great defensive tool that only requires being in the graveyard, Turtle has seen usage in tons of different decks, ranging from Cyber Dragons that capitalize on light machine type monsters, to Dino Zombie decks that just like to mill a lot of cards and have nothing better to include. Similar to Necrogardna, if you're just milling a whole bunch of cards to your graveyard anyway, this can just be an excellent tool in order to help you survive to just keep doing your strategy. However, the two cards also share the same downfall, in which they can be countered by one of the most common staples in the game, Called by the Grave. But if your opponent uses Called by the Grave to negate the effect of Electromagnetic Turtle, then you kind of come out on top because that's kind of a waste of Called by, which is generally used to stop hand traps anyway. Next up at number 5, we have Threatening Roar. This trap is simple and effective. What it does is just doesn't allow your opponent to declare an attack this turn. Threatening Roar gets a high spot on this list for the fact that it's simple, effective, and it has no drawbacks. Once set, it can be used at any time during the following turn. Even when targeted for destruction with the countless destruction effects currently in the game, you can still activate the card to capitalize on the effect. One of the main drawbacks to a lot of the other cards we've talked about so far in this list. And unless it's a game-ending attack, most opponents won't waste their resources negating the effect and save the negate for other cards. However, even being one of the best cards that can stop attacks on this list, it still doesn't really see play anymore in stall decks. All that's mainly because stall decks have moved over to just floodgating your opponent out of being able to play the game at all, rather than trying to stop a singular battle phase. And there's also lots of destruction during your turn, so even though you can chain Threatening Roar to destruction effects, you can't do it during the end phase of the turn in which you set it, which is usually when the card might get popped. However, as far as traps go whose sole purpose is to stop attacks, Threatening Roar is definitely one of the best, which is why it deserves a spot on this list. And at number 4, we have Swift Scarecrow. Swift Scarecrow is a level 1 Earth Machine monster with 0 attack and defense. This card has the effect that when an opponent declares a direct attack, you can discard this card from your hand to negate the attack and then end the battle phase. If you're playing a stall deck, you can use Swift Scarecrow to block out a whole battle phase without having to dedicate resources to the board, which can be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. Although Swift Scarecrow has a great effect, there are two aspects of this card worth considering. First is that Swift Scarecrow's effect can only be activated by a direct attack from your opponent. Although negating a direct attack is great, Swift Scarecrow leaves you with a lot less room for comeback plays on your next turn. Realistically, you've only just bought yourself a turn at the cost of a -1 in card advantage. Secondly is that Swift Scarecrow needs to make it to the graveyard, meaning it can get called by the grave, the same way Maxi or Ash Blossom can to stop the effect. However, being able to end the whole battle phase is a great effect, and is one of the best ways to obviously prevent your opponent from attacking more. The issue still remains, however, that Swift Scarecrow doesn't leave you with too much options to make a comeback, unlike the next card on our list. Pulling slightly ahead of Swift Scarecrow is its brother, Battle Fader. This card shares a lot of similarities with Swift Scarecrow, but does its job a bit better than it in certain circumstances. Battle Fader is a level 1 fiend monster that has comparable effects that activates when an opponent monster declares a direct attack, where you then special summon this card from your hand to end the battle phase, but then it banishes itself when it leaves the field. Pretty similar, right? The difference between the two is in the wording. Rather than discarding itself, Battle Fader special summons itself as well as negates the battle phase. This slight difference is what gives it a somewhat higher spot. Rather than leaving you with no advantage, Battle Fader leaves a monster in the field, which allows you to make more plays on your next turn. Back in the day, Monarch decks would use this to have tribute fodder for their tribute focus archetype, and preferred it because they couldn't set spell or trap cards in their field due to the conditions of Treeborn Frog. So it was a way to not die during their opponent's turn in case all their monsters got destroyed. However, Battle Fader is not without its flaws. It suffers from the same issues that Swift Scarecrow faces, in which the activation requirement is only a direct attack. But rather than being a target for cards that affect the graveyard, Battle Fader is subject to summoning negates like Solemn Judgment, and also leaves you with a monster in the field, which some stall decks actually don't want. Regardless, a card that can not only special summon itself as well as negate the battle phase is still a phenomenal effect that prevents your opponent from attacking while leaving you with some room to make more plays. And at our number 2 spot, we have Rainbow Kuriboh. This is another card in the Kuriboh line of monsters. Rainbow Kuriboh has two effects that have quite the defensive utility that can be activated once per turn. The first effect allows Rainbow Kuriboh to target an attacking monster and equip itself from the hand to that monster. While equipped, the monster cannot attack. Then the secondary effect has a similar effect to Battle Fader, in which during a direct attack from your opponent, you can special summon Rainbow Kuriboh from the graveyard to block the attack. Then it gets banished. Rainbow Kuriboh has a lot of utility, not only with its effect but with its typing as seen when used with different decks that include Skull Servants, Light Sworns, and Shaddolls. For the same reason why Electromagnetic Turtle saw usage and popularity, Rainbow Kuriboh shares kind of the same theme. Rainbow Kuriboh was popular with decks that could easily discard cards to the graveyard, as not only could Kuriboh's effect be activated from the grave, but even if you did draw into it, you could still find usage for the card. Although Rainbow Kuriboh has seen a decline and hasn't seen professional usage since 2017. But it is one of the few cards whose sole purpose is to kinda block attacks that has seen play in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! However, the next card on this list has seen more usage and has a way more potent effect, and kind of makes all other stall cards useless. And at number 1, we have Mystic Mine. This card basically prevents all monsters from attacking and prevents all monsters from being able to activate their effects. However, it destroys itself if you and your opponent control an equal amount of monsters. And having 0 monsters on both sides of the field counts as controlling the same amount of cards. Since its release in 2019, this field spell has seen all sorts of use in the TCG, and is currently forbidden in the OCG due to the sheer power of Mystic Mine. Mystic Mine excels as a floodgate and the ultimate stall card all in one, because it does the 2 very important things you want to do if you're trying to stall out your opponent. It negates monster effects, which is the most common way a player destroys spell or trap cards on the field with effects like Nightmare Phoenix or Axis Code Talker, and also prevents combos from allowing those kinds of big monsters to come out in the first place, as they usually need to activate a lot of monster effects in order to bring out the combo pieces necessary to go into those boss monsters. In addition, even if your opponent does just normal summon their level 4 or lower monsters and try to attack you, they can't because it also blocks attacks for whatever reason. So, as long as you just sit on Mystic Mine, your opponent can't do anything unless they draw a spell or trap card out, like Mystical Space Typhoon or Harpy's Feather Duster. And since you can kinda plan around your opponent's only out here Mystic Mine, you can simply play something like Solemn Judgment to negate their 1 out, and kinda be set to stall at your opponent indefinitely, until they can go into their side deck and get even more in spell and trap card destruction, in which case you can put even more negations for spell and trap card destruction in order to stall it long enough to get off whatever strategy you're trying to accomplish. Which could simply be done with just the Cauldron of the Old Man, which allows you to increasingly deal burn damage to your opponent every turn. And really, because Mystic Mine exists, if your whole strategy is just to stall your opponent out for whatever reason, there's really no reason to not just play Mystic Mine Turbo, trying to get the card to the field as quickly as possible, that way your opponent can't do anything about the card, which is why people are calling for the card to be banned in the TCG to follow along the OCG's decision to get rid of it. And of course, Mystic Mine is easily the best card in the game that can stop attacks, because it also prevents the common form of getting rid of cards that can stop attacks, i.e. monsters that destroy back row. Alright, and that's the list. Are there any other cards that stop attacks that you may have missed, or do you have any ideas for future videos just like this one? If so, we'd love to hear about those things down in the comments.